all to the second day of the National Webinar on World Literature. We feel really delighted to have a panel of esteemed speakers to address us. Today we have with us our esteemed speaker of the day, Dr. Barnali Chanda. I request my dear colleague Dr. Chanda Acharya to chair the session. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Rindan. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome all our virtual attendees who have taken all the extra pain to be a part of this webinar, national webinar, and in fact, it is going international right now. And I take this opportunity and the pleasure at the same time to welcome our eminent speaker today, Dr. Barnali Chanda, to the second day of the webinar. The title of the talk is Introducing World Literature from Rabindranath to Martin Puchner. Before that, I would like to briefly talk about our speaker as well as the concept note. I would like to welcome Dr. Barnali Chanda. Welcome, ma'am. She is going to join as Ashoka Harvard Yenching Institute China Studies postdoctoral fellow. She is currently working as a visiting research associate at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. She has worked as an assistant professor in the Department of International Studies and History, Christ University, deemed to be. Before joining Christ, she taught English literature as an assistant professor at the Techno India University from 2018 to 2019. She was a Harvard Yenching Institute Comparative Literature Visiting Fellow from 2016 to 17. She was selected as 2015 Emerging Scholar by the India-China Institute New School, New York. She received the MOFA Huayu Enrichment Scholarship 2011 to 2012, the duration, and HRD Chinese Government Scholarship 2008-2009. She has also co-authored 2 books of Asian Lands, A View from Bengal, an annotated bibliography of a century of travel narratives to Asian lands in Bangla, published by Jadavpur University in 2009, and Tellings and Retellings, Strange Tales of Medieval China, published from Jadavpur University in 2015. So there are many accolades attached to her name. Briefly, I would also talk about the concept note. So this webinar today, the talk would focus on the concepts of national literature, comparative literature, and world literature. It will also look at the transmission of texts, consumption and production of literary texts, epistemologies and philosophies across spatio-temporal dimensions, national delimitations within the context of an international setting. It will also address the transformation of the concept from to and map other newer researchers from different point of views. So it will survey the critique of the concept of world literature also in order to draw a complete picture of it. So I would request our speaker to take it over. So please request Barnali ma'am to take over.
Thank you. Okay, I am audible, clearly audible, right? I hope so.
Okay. Yes, I'm audible.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction. I am much obliged. So, respected teachers and my I don't know how to actually address Rindan. Rindan, he was my junior in Jadavpur University. So respected teachers from Sri Sri University, distinguished guests presented here, the students and the virtual audience, a very warm greetings of the day. And thank you so much for being here. When Rindan spoke about this national webinar, it was mostly about it's a classroom presentation that he spoke about, like maximum 100 probably a student will be there. So I prepared my presentation that way, but now as I see, it's a lot. Please, this is my request. Please don't expect any scholarly, scholarly speech or scholarly lecture. This is something that I prepared for someone from maybe somebody who is interested in world literature, just have started looking into world literature, is interested in it, and mostly for the UG1 and UG2 students, as I taught in Christ University already. So this is how it is, and I will be introducing today the different concepts of world literature and the sort of the evolution of the concept of world literature, starting from, let's say, Goethe to Martin Puchner, which is the recent critic of world literature. So shall I start my speech now?
Sure, ma'am, sure.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me just share the PPT. Share screen. All right. So, as my students would know that world literature would definitely start with Goethe. And it's a term which is in use for more than 2 centuries now. And although it is said that Goethe in 1827 he coined the term for world literature, but that's already, we know that that's really not the case. The historian August Ludwig von Schleicher and the writer Christoph Martin Wieland had used the term earlier. So between 1827 to 1832, which is the year of Goethe's death, Goethe used this term in altogether 21 brief passages. So that's a lot. And Goethe considered world literature to be a historical phenomenon linked to the social, political, and technological developments related to Europe's emergence in the period of a violent warfare occasioned by the French Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars. Goethe was looking for an antidote to French imperialism and the authoritarianism that the Napoleonic era unleashed in Europe. Now, he saw possibilities for the German language and literature serving as mediators for the dissemination of work in foreign languages throughout Europe. He thought of transnational literature that would inculcate understanding and toleration among nations and people, and that was very important in that kind of a in that time when it was completely it's a violent time and Europe is trying to settle down for quite a long time. He believed that the uniqueness will be preserved in this process of mutual exchange and recognition. So this promotion was totally based on the time and the place of the speaker. That is something we have to keep in mind when I am speaking of world literature and in this talk. So the speaker who is speaking about world literature, that the person's time, space, everything matters, how he conceptualize world literature. Now I come to Tagore, who talked Rabindranath Tagore, who spoke about Vishwa Sahitya in 1907. It was, and we have to remember that this is a time when Tagore was in league with the Asian intellectuals who were thinking of Pan-Asianism. And this Pan-Asianism is an ideology that promotes the political and economic unity and cooperation of Asian peoples. He imagined literature, Sahitya, which is derived from the word Sahit, which means together, right? To be communicative linguistic act that connects people. His purpose is to realize being through all the extra conceptual resources of languages, as well as through the word performed or written or recited or sung. The process of literalization and its product, the literary object, appear to be similar across cultures only if we understand literature as not confined to its literal meaning, that is the written, but the concept denoted by it or it carry with it. Now, Sahitya as an expression of greater truth and humanism he says that the intention of human world um, is is to understand, or is to empathize with the other person. So he talks about universalism, he talks against nation state. So he is in league, as I told, he is in league with this Asian intellectuals from Japan and China also, who talked about an Asian unity, who thought about an Asian unity. Obviously, Pan-Asianism did not work, but that's another story. He repeatedly spoke against the idea of a nation state and explained how hegemonic strategy replaces. Sorry, I should. Um, okay, sorry, I should be careful that I'm changing the slides. I'm sorry, really, I apologize for it. So he repeatedly spoke against the idea of a nation state and explained how um, um, and explained how it is how hegemonic strategy replaces the arts and humanities, and therefore he talks about how Kipling replaces Tennyson. He was of the opinion that we should be reading Tennyson more than Kipling, and there is a very interesting observation which I found, that when I am if I study the Harvard University syllabus for world literature, it doesn't study Tennyson, it actually studies Kipling. And we can talk about that later on as I move. He believes in the idea of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and he thinks of literature, a temple of literature for the citizen of the world. Human beings as the masons, skills from all around the world is contributing to it. And for him, the author is not a laborer, but a skillful artisan. So the world literature is not merely the sum of writings, but it is it represents the world led by harmonizing humanitarian impulses, interconnectedness, with every man's attempt at self-expression, or expressed through different kinds of literatures. Now I thought that before jumping directly to, I mean, mostly we will be talking about, we can talk about Spivak, we also can talk about Zhang Longshi, and authors who wrote about world literature later on. But I thought, why not touch upon this different approaches that was taken during this Cold War period, and those ideologies are also very interesting. And I thought I would be introducing here 2 or 3 authors who had written during the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s about world literature, the concept of world literature. And the first comes here as Auerbach's mimesis, and he talks about uh, literature while he is in Istanbul. He is in exile during World War II, and so he says that this world literature, or the literature, represents decay of inner basis of national existence. The general standardization of world culture is quite threatening. And he also says that a superabundance of literary materials beyond grasp of a single method is something that we have to understand. And he says that in order to understand this new world, this post-World War world, we need to have new methods. And therefore, only with those new methods, we have to understand literatures from all around the world, or world literature as we understand it during that time. So here also we cannot really ignore Auerbach's position, Auerbach's time and space, from which position he is talking about. So he says that world literature can't really only represent, as Goethe has yearned it to be, like it's a spiritual exchanges between small groups of highly cultivated men, or a reconciliation is not possible in a dichotomized or highly propagandizing world. So in this new world literature, which is animated by a different idea of history and method, coalescence of culture for people amidst multiplicity, here philological home becomes, art becomes the philological home. So that is what he wanted to introduce here. And the Goethe's idea of world literature and Auerbach's philological citizenship actually sets up a dialogue with each other, and that's quite interesting. Um, Now, I would briefly talk about Warner Frederick, who also in 1964 who was actually the founding member of the North Carolina University Comparative Literature Department, and he gave this idea for literature and nationalist expression. He says that this is a narrowness over literary scholarship. As we talk about it, we cannot also really ignore Rene Wellick, who is saying that this is a result of bureaucratization of literary study. And he thought that while literature is impoverished in literature, it is an impoverishment of literature. It is a specter of cultural expansionism. Um, and it should be an aesthetic imperium introducing new world of imagination where national vanities will disappear. So this, when this kind of discussions are going on, there are a lot of, a lot of discussions on world literature, new ideas, new methods are being found out. Comparative literature definitely takes a place here, and comparative literature comes up with new methods and try to introduce methodologies which will help the students or help the readers to understand a literature, a piece of literature, um, across time, across traditions, and different kinds of readings can be possible where the place and the time, where the text can be positioned in the in certain place and time. So in 1992, from Hong Kong, we have to mention Chang Longshu's idea of comparative literature. He was not at all very optimistic about this possibility of world literature, what it can do. Um, so he did not think that this, the global literary history which might overcome all such obstacles, as I mentioned above. He he through his work wanted to make the difference between East and West, which is productive in relation to the understanding of literature. Now the greatest critic of Chang Longxi is again questioning what is East and what is West, and how are you differentiating these two. But even then, even though there are a lot of critics um, uh, made about him, it's very interesting that how he is thinking about the space from which he is speaking about, and the similar kind of response probably we will also see when we will talk about Ipshita Chando's essay. So his seminal work, maybe many of you are already familiar with it, the Tao and the Logos, the literary hermeneutics, East and West. In this, he sets up a dialogue between literatures and the interpretative traditions from both the East and the West. And he did not focus on canonical works, which could be called world literature. So Chang compares discourses on literature and its uses with reference to literary examples. And this facilitates a deeper understanding of the plurality of the world literatures. Um, Chang was quite interesting, had a very interesting uh, example to give when he mentioned the idea of comparative literature and the world literature, how to read literature, and he mentions Ge Hong. Ge Hong is a second century Chinese philosopher who said that literature is valuable for its richness and variety. Why should any comments, any appreciations be unified as if coming out of one mouth? And that is something he starts with, Zhang Longxi. Um, this was said in Ge Hong's book called Pao Puzi. Uh, so after Chang Longxi, the similar kind of this is quite a huge critique of how the world literature was being seen during that time, and we have to also remember that Chang Longxi is speaking from the position when globalization is actually has taken place, and the world is not being thought about the way it was. It's a post Cold War era, And this is the time when also transnationalism is being introduced. Appadura is thinking about transnationalism, and all of these things are like, migration, diaspora, all of these thoughts are coming up. So this is a very interesting period, and I guess the students who are listening to it might be having courses on, nationalism and diaspora, and how to understand the different kinds of how to understand transnationalism, how to understand globalization, and how to understand literature in that context. um, so I thought I will also introduce very quickly Franco Moretti, and who wrote Conjectures on World Literature and More Conjectures. And he actually edited this. Once he wrote it in 2000, and then 2003 he added a few things. Now Franco Moretti, it's quite difficult to introduce him very quickly, but still for students I thought it would be helpful. So he is often contrasted with the contributions of David Damrosch and Pascal Casanova in the context of the renewed interest in world literature. Moretti weighs the pros and cons of expanding the scope of traditional comparative approach, which investigates 3 or 4 literatures, to the enormous task of dealing with world literature. The concept of distant reading is introduced, and it is introduced as a shorthand for focusing secondhand, so to speak, on literary phenomena, such as a particular narrative device across a number of literatures. Since no one is capable of mastering the enormous corpus of languages and literatures of the world, such research of necessity has to rely on the previous work of the other scholars that have been done, who has worked on it, who has worked done primary research on it, at least one or in a quite a few literary texts in its original languages. As an example, he shows how distant reading allows us to trace the dissemination of, for example, the novel, which he discusses in the essay, around the world, and to research how similarities and differences are created when a new literature adapts the form of novel. So he is totally against a closed reading and analysis, as he thinks that it underpins the notion of canonical greatness. Uh, so he now he discusses a lot of how to understand literature through tree and wave approach. I am not going into it. If I have any questions, I will be talking about it. So there are 2 approaches that he mentions, and it's quite interesting how he's thinking about literature as a tree, and how he's thinking about influence as wave. So he wanted maximum methodological boldness, like experimentation with the different kinds of methodologies, how a text can be read. This would bring this kind of, he wanted this kind of methodology to bring in statistics, charts, graphs, and maps of sociological analysis to literary study. He says this will allow the retrieval of the unread and the identification of patterns as broad and diverse as the uncharted expanse of literature itself. Now he adopts the method textually and systematically, and he traces the similarities in the intertextual functional unit, which is device, according to Moretti, in order to map changes and transformation in the supratextual, which is transcending textual, as you understand, unit, and that is genre. So these ideas are highly contrastive of what David Damrosch has to say. In 2003 only, he will be writing what is comparative literature, and it's very different from what Franco Moretti had to say. Actually, there is a sort of a questioning what David Damrosch is doing, and sort of you can see the conflict very, very clearly in the essay. And then when we are talking about comparative literature, world literature, and the methodologies, to study comparative literature or world literature, we cannot really leave behind Vilashini Kupan, who wrote this essay in 2001, where she basically introduced the globalized reading. Now, Vilashini Kuppan is writing from the same space, probably the way I am right now doing, the way I am doing. It's like she's trying to think how to take world literature to the university undergrad classrooms. So she has been sort of, trying to see how can I introduce globalized reading so that the mixed batch of students, where the students are from different nations, right? They have different national identities. So how can they understand world literature uh, the way it should be, and how can they actually contextualize world literature and understand it the way they want to? So she is mostly talking about advocates this what she calls as globalized reading, in which works from different traditions, different regions, different times are read concurrently, and thus revealing unexpected but not necessarily unrelated lineages, parallels, and contrasts. So importantly, such globalized reading does not presupposes the hegemony of any kind of center, geographically, culturally, historically, socially, but rather starts from the equality of all texts read. She's also thinking, just like the current lecture, the way I am saying that if I take the world literature to the university classroom, what would be the response? How the students will be thinking about it. And then she's trying to make a method, find the best methodology to read a text, to make it more pluralistic, more inclusive. While we read, for example, while we read Thousand and One Night, Decameron, Canterbury Tales, Grimm's Tales, or the Chinese Taiping Guangji, which many of you may not be familiar with, but this also includes all the stories that we have been reading in the text that I just mentioned, Thousand and One Nights, Decameron, Canterbury Tales. So we have to imagine an endlessly warped continuum of linguistic contrasts and an evolving radius of literary action. In this context, reading is not a central point of radius, a multiplying and dispersing process of extension, elaboration, and randomization. The constantly deterritorializing work of a global readership that is never unified. So this is how she is thinking about uh, the the, the methodology, like how to introduce the text, how to talk about the text in the classroom. I don't know whether I should use the word hybridized classroom, but well, we can probably talk about it. So globalized reading is a concentric pattern, a series of polycentric encounters. It doesn't attempt to create an alternative canon, which would change the current positioning of the canonical and the non-canonical as one another's opposites. But globalized reading changes the way we see, help us taking a text and placing it alongside one from another tradition and time. And it completely displaces the hegemonic sense of the world. And it is in favor of the many worlds, individually distinct and connected. Distinct but connected. She gives an example of Odyssey written in different time and traditions, but I think I can skip that part. Now we come to David Damrosch, who writes about what is comparative literature in 2003. Um, According to him, while literature is, as all literature that circulates, either in translation or in the original, beyond its own national or linguistic cultural borders. And then he brings this elliptical ideas, ellipse metaphor, and that approach to world literature and his views on translation to understand the text in translation or in original. So he thinks that elliptical refraction of national literature is needed, and he thinks that um, a text gains in translation. A writing always gains in translation, and he doesn't think that world literature or this can is it's not a set of canon of texts, but a mode of reading, a form of detached engagement with worlds beyond our own place and time. There are a lot of problems with what this essay speaks about, and that's why I thought I will be including Ikshita Chando, A View from Outside the Window, which is sort of a response to what David Damrosch has to write, what is comparative literature. Those who have read Ikshita Chando's essay, you know that um, how beautifully there is a dialogue, how scathing the the criticism is in this essay. Um, Ikshita Chanda says that it's literature is a special type of language use. The student of literature studies the generic and thematic specificity in relation to the poetic codes available in the culture. Um, she questions, in the very beginning, she questions the idea of the notion of the world and therefore the notion of literature. So the notion of the world, and again she used the rest of the world and therefore literature. So when we say rest of the world, that is, I think, very prominent way of asking questions to the the idea of world literature, literature in translation, and translated mostly in English, right? So who will be reading what? Who is able to read the texts in written in translated in English? So that is also, that question also comes here. So so she questions the idea of world, rest of the world, and therefore the literature. So while literature doesn't in no way expresses a singular notion, it's not a it's not really uh, a conceptual category, but only an ideology, well-meaning attempt at inclusion or hospitality to literature across the rest of the world. Now, usually I ask the students, what do you understand by the rest of the world? But so I hope here the students who are present who can understand what she is talking about. This is the, she is talking about the colonized countries which have been, the, the those who actually were educated in English and who were colonized at one point of time and received English education through this colonization only. She is talking from that aspect, and we are one of them, right? So we are talking about us also here. So as you know um, so while literature represents, universalizes the impulses and the affect of literature, and as a category it contradicts the uniqueness of literary activity. As Western academia and different programs, they try to include, all the regions that they want to include. They want the literature to be included from all these regions. It may vary from China to Peru, but how far those are successful, that's a question, and that's a good question. And with this, where does the plurality of Indian languages stand? We can ask that. How to understand world literature in a multilingual literary culture like India? So, if we look at world literature in time and place, that's Eurocentrism in the mid 19th century, as we already mentioned. We mentioned Goethe, right? So, why do we need it now? So she asked this question, and she brings in the role of comparative literature as it asks the text to be positioned in time and place of their production, so that we can understand and communicate with the world in which they were created. Now, Goethe and Tagore spoke about world literature in a very different manner, where they saw the world led by harmonizing humanitarian impulses. But with this time, the world also has changed. Do we need it now? So Goethe never talked about cross-cultural influences, by the way, and or setting up a world literature canon. He just advocated an expansion of literary horizon, and where all parts to be read by all parts. So while literature also depends on international markets, and uh, as Marx and Engels have reconfirmed already in their essay in 1848. Um, um, so such reframings, as identified by Andre Lefebvre, which is the manipulation of literatures, precisely for the purpose of world circulation, which is translation and rewriting. So international market and globalization would play a great role in this, idea of world literature, or how you are thinking about world literature. And here I cannot but mention how the world literature anthologies have been published since 1955, or even before 1953 probably. Almost every year a new kind of, a new set of world literature anthology is coming up, which shows that we are more inclusive than the previous one, because we are including the newest traditions, the newest countries, which were not there before. So and with each anthology, the market, also we cannot, the market of printing, market of circulation, we cannot really ignore, which will be definitely touched upon by Martin Puchner. So she is thinking about how world literature is trying to institutionalize hybridity, and definitely she is scathingly, criticizing Damrosch's notion here. And she's saying that as an it's not an she's not saying that it's an alternative, but how to read a text. She is talking about that from her position, which is this multilingual country as India. And she's saying that comparative literature provides a method of studying literary texts written in different languages, produced by different cultures in different parts of the world. So therefore, so as we know that, as Damrosch has already spoken about it, that all works cease to be the exclusive production of their original culture once they are translated, um, and becomes the works of the only the the language in which it is translated. So either all texts are reframed in the power language of the day, which is English, or they just cease to exist. And Ipshita Chanda scathingly criticizes this idea and introduces that how this, how any text is a production of a particular time and space, and comparative literature helps to see the world we intend to. So when you read Ipshita Chanda, you can see this dialogue and how differently she is thinking about this particular, the window, which is the rest of the, which is situated in the rest of the world, and how she is thinking, how he's talking about world literature from the from her position. Now I come to Martin Buckner, and his book, very recent publication, The Written World. In this book, he shows that the literature of the time emerges from the social, political, economic, and religious elements of a civilization, and how literature interacts with these very elements of the society. Um, so in this Martin Buckner's book, he includes different kinds of writings from different traditions and different places all across the world, and and which was translated from the original, and he makes this anthology, and he writes about writing, right? And when he is writing about writing, he's also mentioning how the writings are changed over the time. So here he says that the story of literature, how the story of literature slowly took shape, and that was in 4 stages. The first stage was dominated by a small group of scribes who used to write down what the king has to say. The second was by the charismatic teachers like Confucius, Buddha, teachers like Socrates, and then the third stage by the individual authors. So when the authors are writing, when someone is claiming that this is my book, um, and in the fourth stage, the widespread use of paper and print. Um, Very interestingly, when we read The Written World, this book, we can see that there is again a problem um, coming up. although he mentions it in his speech, he mentions it also. So this, the time for this different kinds of stages, they are very different in very different traditions. For example, the third stage, when the authors are writing and claiming that this is my this is my piece of writing, probably China is thinking in a very different way. And for the Chinese authors, it was very important that that the print system was already there, so it was getting printed in the 7th century Tang dynasty. Okay, but then the authors are not claiming that piece of writing as his own, but they are more interested in the printing, using the paper and print. So let it go anonymously, or let it go in somebody else's name. It does not really matter, but it needs to get published. So there are a different kind of, the stages are not really always linear. Anyway, so it is a world where religion to the idea of nation all routinely converse with voices from the past, and imagine that we might address readers of the future, right? As the printed the printed forms of books are in existence. So Martin Buckner's history of writing, the printed word of storytelling, it is a very beautiful tour through the places and texts that have shaped our lives and history. From the ancient Chinese library in Dunhuang to this tracing of Goethe's route through Sicily in search of the world literature. Um, and he says that the storytelling and writings this intersection of the storytelling and the writing, the literature is born. And that's how he tries to maintain when he's thinking about his anthologies of world literature. So there are a couple of anthologies which have been published in 2017, 18, 19. It is continuously, it is being published. And in each anthology, he's trying to include a different section of um, or a different linguistic group of people who have not been, whose literature have not found place previously. So this tradition this is the discourse which is still on, and we have to look forward to what really happens. um, and well, I feel that if for a student of world literature, when you are studying world literature, or you have started studying world literature, just do not, it's very important that you have to understand this, that the text is a product of the time and the place, and how to read that. The methodology is not a fixed one. There has to be there has to be several methodologies to read one single text, and that is something that you have to exercise in the classroom or outside the classroom. So I really go with this, what Ga Hong has said. Literature is valuable for its richness and variety. Why should any comments and appreciations be unified as if coming out of one mouth? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, ma'am. There are a couple of questions which our participants are ready with. They have some questions. So, is it good to start now? Can we take some questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. So, I'll just read it out. Some questions have come. Uh, while looking at world literature, does the loss of any emotion or message because of translation create a barrier while studying it? I can come again.
Yes, please.
While looking at world literature, does the loss of any emotion or message because of translation create a barrier while studying it?
Yes, obviously that's what I think, the dialogue between Franco Moretti or Ipshita Chanda and David Damrosch is going on. So yes, a lot is lost in translation, and but while we are reading it, there are, it's very difficult for us, I mean, to understand, to read literature in original, like the original text, especially the almost half of the world we don't know the languages, and we cannot really have expertise. um, for example, I know Chinese, but I still cannot read entire text very fluently the way I could read it in English. Okay, so while when I am reading this in Chinese and in English, I can understand the laws in translation, but you will not understand it, right? Someone who is reading in English, the person will not understand. But at the same time, Chinese, it took me 10 years to excel in that, to have a grasp over Chinese, and still a lot of Asian languages are left out. So it is not possible, but yes, we have to also understand that there is nothing else that we can do in order to read text, read literature. We have to depend on translation. Now, how the translation is being done, Martin Puchner tries to be very very particular about it, that he's the someone he takes text only from he makes people translate texts from original into English. So that is, and probably there is a board of translation translators who will be reviewing the translation and would comment on it, that how perfect it is, how close it is, not perfect, I'm sorry, but how close it can go. And that's how we can hope to have the essence of the original text. But yes, we cannot hope to
Yes.
have the all of it. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. I hope it has addressed our participants' query. Ma'am, there is this another interesting method that you were talking about, the tree and wave method. So this
Mhm.
question has come from one of our participants, Sushmita Sridhar. She has asked, could you tell us a little more about the tree and wave methods of approaching literature? How is world literature as we use it today different from comparative literature in their approach to the literary text?
Yes. So the for the tree and the wave method, it's what this is what Franco Moretti introduces, and he says that he tries to understand literature through tree and wave approach. The wave approach is interested mostly in the spread of influences in the form of genres and their features. So it's mostly like how the so influence and wave, he's sort of trying to draw a metaphor between these two, and he's trying to look at literary history as a tree and literature as branches, and it's shaped the larger changing history of literary genres. Now, if we are thinking of literary history as a tree, you can understand that the branches also has a dead end, right? So this is a very interesting, it will be interesting way if we question that where does the dead ends go. Does the genre actually I mean it sees a dead end, or how do we actually go on to how does a genre actually evolve over the time? Some genres does, some genre do not, right? So that is what he is trying to say. So that is the tree and the wave approach. And how different is comparative literature from world literature, right? So world literature, as we now understand it, if we read the anthology of world literature, that is how it is being taught in the American universities right now. If we see the Harvard University syllabus on world literature, it's a series of translated works translated in English, and it includes Kipling, it includes Chinese short stories in English, Lucian's short stories in English. So uh, so we are reading texts in English, that is the world literature, but we are following certain methods. We are also focusing on the translation method. We are also talking about translation studies while we are reading world literature. Comparative literature, what it mostly does is that it posits the it position the text in the time, across the time, in the intersection of time and place. So we can do a synchronic and diachronic study of the text, and synchronic and diachronic study, I would I don't know, I mean, if you have read it, so it's like according across the time and the space, we are trying to understand that particular text. What kind of influences does it hold? What tradition does it carry with it? What kind of intertextuality is there or not? All these we try to understand. So comparative literature is this way different from world literature, as it probably tries to understand the nuances of the text, the nuances of the how the author has been thinking, how the author, or also what, from what position the author is writing this text, which actually shapes the text, right? For world literature, we do that obviously, but not to that great extent. Probably we actually probably do not really exercise that method, right? I mean, we do not really synchronically and diachronically try to understand. That is a difference.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. There are like a rush of questions coming on, so I just go to the next question. It is asked by Ajay Chuchar. This question is: World literature is helpful in literary historiography, according to Moretti. So, what do you think the role of world literature theory can be in literary historiography of marginalized literatures, in regional literatures like Gujarati, Marathi, or say Bengali for that case?
Right. So when we are talking about world literature, this is a question which I gets very often actually from my students, that how to talk about then Gujarati literature. If it is translated into English, will it be a part of world literature? Um, yes, probably that is how ideally it should be, right? I mean, if it is being read about if it is if it is translated and is being read by a whole a bunch of readers, then ideally it should be a part of world literatures. But does it happen really? Does it really happen? That is something that you have to question probably, right? I mean, um, how many Bengali literary pieces or Gujarati literary pieces is being incorporated in the anthology of world literature, which is the most recent one even. So not really that it becomes a part of world literature. Although, I mean, you can always question that, always ask the question, why? Yeah. So probably that is, I would say that is the problem with world literature.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. I hope this has addressed you, dear participant. This is another question by Meher Gandhi. Many subject departments in various universities are being shut down, which actually we get to see these days. So subject departments are getting shut down. Do you think that this would hinder any further development and study of comparative literature?
Subject departments means, I mean, you mean the single literature subjects? I'm just for a clarification. Uh,
I guess Mr. Meher Gandhi, I think he wants to say about the subjects typical of English literature itself.
hmm. No, I don't think in English literature is being the departments are affected anyway, because the new CBCS rule that says that you can include any this world literature, comparative literature, all of these. There is a possibility that we can actually include it now, and we can start teaching them also. So um, challenges of comparative literature is huge. Yes, the point here is that yes, we are including world literature, comparative literature in most of the universities. You can see it now. Yes, it is being included. It is being taught. What is required is that probably a little more expertise in it. That how to teach world literature, uh, how to teach comparative literature. That is something that should come. That should be our right now our focus should be that, because there are a lot of departments which are right now having the comparative literature or world literature, and then the whether we really have the experts who can do that, and if it's not there, then how to create experts who can teach. uh, so yeah, the challenges would always be there, but um, we are the people who has to who have to work for it, who have to probably create more workshops, workshops on how to teach, how to run a department, or how to run a program of world literature. And that has happened in USA, and as of now I can say that I am the China Studies postdoctoral fellow, and one of the things that I will be teaching, or I will be thinking about, is how to teach Chinese literature, or how to teach China studies, and how to bring it to the to in the Indian context, and the literary history, or literature, literary studies, and all of this. So there has to be such provisions where people can think about it. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. You're so elusive in discussions. And there are still more questions coming. What is a transculturated text? How are adaptation and transculturation related to world literature?
Adaptation and transculturation. Um, so I mean, well, wait. You mean a literary adaptation of a literary text, and then how it is becoming a part of world literature? It is so. World literature includes all of this. With culturation only, we can actually think about. We can get acquainted with this. With the traditions, the newer traditions, or the traditions which are there, existing traditions, and then we can. The translation process goes like that only, right? With the culturation comes the awareness, and therefore you can go into translation and adaptation of a text. Yes, I mean, if you see in the anthologies, you can also see that some of the syllabus in US universities, they teach the scripts, the adaptation of literary uh, text, probably into a script, or probably into something else. They can teach that. So yes, adaptation uh, definitely holds a place in world literature. Yeah. I hope I replied your I answered your query.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I'm sure the participants are satiated. I would take up a couple of questions more until our time. Uh, can you please elaborate something about views of Kathleen Shield, and what is the politics of literary cartography associated with world literature? Two questions embedded, ma'am.
Yeah, can you just read it again?
Uh, views of Kathleen Shield,
Okay.
and the second question is, what is the politics of literary cartography associated with world literature?
The first name I'm not aware of. Maybe you can explain it more to me.
Oh,
Uh,
yes, ma'am.
and the second question, literary cartography, which is it's a very interesting. I have you read The Written World by Martin Buckner? He talks about it, the literary cartography, and how this cartography, one of these maps, how it changed the notion of Martin Buckner. It was discovered by Martin Buckner's student, and how it changed, made him think about world literature in a very different manner. So the yeah, definitely it is very important, and it should needs a lot of attention. It's a very new area of study also, literary cartography. If we are talking about it, then it's like how the people have been thinking about the world, right? And as I'm talking about Martin Buckner and his student found a map where the world has have been thought upon in a very different manner. And that also happened when we talk about the Chinese text Shanhai Ching, the the story of mountains and and the rivers. They think about the world in a very different manner. So this different worlds do exist. The moment we say the different worlds do exist, the moment the definition of world literature also should be you know should be criticized, or should be thought upon, that how what world are we talking about. So yes, it holds a huge importance.
Okay, okay. I hope this is our participants are listening carefully, and we can take some more questions. Can you please gloss a bit more on how literature is born by the intersection of storytelling and writing?
Okay. Okay, so it's a very well I always, actually, this is a very, I thought this is a classroom, so I'm treating it that way only. Please do read Martin Buckner's book. It's a very interesting reading. It's very how he's thinking about storytelling and literature. So basically it's like so storytelling means at some point of time when there is no there is no written record, right? People are not writing. They are only, there is a tradition of, passing of information from one generation to another generation. So that is how the storytelling tradition, we are thinking about. So this storytelling tradition exists in all the traditions, all the cultures across the world. Every culture had it, because that is the beginning of our sort of civilizational, civilizations
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
And then when it comes to the written, then there is a need for writing, recording, what we are thinking about, right? What we are talking about. The information needs to be written, to be recorded. It's mostly written in the for the purpose of recording. And when we are recording it, are we recording it exactly the way we heard it? We are not, right? We cannot, we do not know what the earliest Vedas talked about and what has been written later on. There might be a massive difference, right? So the literature which has the component of imagination in it is born in this intersection, when the storytelling tradition is there and there is this written record. And when I heard something, a story from my mother, and then I am writing it down, but while I'm writing it down, I am also putting some elements of imagination, and there is the literature. And at that intersection, the literature is born.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. This is really interesting a session, and I think we are left with two important questions, quite relevant. Is Zhang Dongski thinking about world literature as a comparison of East and West, or is he theorizing about world literature in terms of Western theories of world literature having dominance over Eastern theories of world literature?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Very good question. Yes. No, he's not really thinking about a comparison of the East and the West. He did not do that. He's thinking about the second way, the second one. He's thinking about it that he is trying to, find out the Eurocentrism. He's talking about Eurocentrism, and then talking about, Eastern, literary canon. And he's saying that there can be different methodologies to understand that. It's not that we have to understand always this Eastern. So again, the problem with this, that how do we say East and West? But anyway, the Eastern, Asian literatures, with the method, with the help of the methodologies borrowed from the Western, Western Eurocentric uh, literary studies. So the second, as you said, yeah, but it's a very good question. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Thank you, ma'am. There is this another question. I know that there is a plus of questions, and you are like answering each and every question without any stop or period for breath. So this is another
It's
question,
all
ma'am.
right.
The,
Yeah.
the entire focus of the concept of world literature and comparative literature appears confrontational and more or less rooted in demography and topography. Please comment.
Yeah.
Also, okay, should I also go
Yes.
ahead with the second
Please
part? Okay.
go ahead, please.
How does the slant of literature be induced towards sentience, world sentience?
Towards.
I would spell it Sentience, sentience,
Oh, sentient.
whichever way you would pronounce it.
Okay. Uh, can I get this? Like the first part and the second part. I mean,
Yes,
can I?
yes, ma'am. But the first part I would come again. The entire focus of the concept of world literature
Hmm.
and comparative literature appears confrontational and more or less rooted in demography and topography.
Hmm.
Please comment on that.
Um. Well, I don't know whether I should use the word demography and topography. I should rather try to use different words. But what you are saying is right. It's confrontational to a certain extent. Although, um, I mean, the way actually I presented it, it looked like that. Although it can be complementary to each other at certain point of time, so it's not always confrontational. But yes, how are we reading a text? That matters. And demography and topography, I would ask you to rethink about these words, probably as this, when we are using it in the context of literature. Probably we can say that how we are thinking about a text in the context of time and space, and across time and space, how are we positioning the author and the text at the same time. um, how are we looking at the tradition when we are talking about a text. So that way you can probably think about it. And the second one, can you please just...
Yes, ma'am. Once again, how does the slant of literature be induced toward sentience, the word sentience? So,
Okay. mm, it's uh, well, I think this I am if I am thinking about my presentation today, I think are you talking about trying to talk about how Goethe and Tagore looked at literature? Is it so? I mean, yes, I mean, definitely that was a time. It's the mid 19th century and early 20th century. It was a time when they mostly focused on it, because they are talking about, as I told you, universalism. They are talking about European, how Europe is trying to find peace, and different, how the countries which are at loggerheads with each other, trying to find sort of a settlement. So that way, in that sense, Goethe was talking about different kinds of emotions, that how humanism, how how this sort of the approaches can be more, we can think about something beyond national, which Tagore also does. I mean, he's talking about directly about universalism, he's talking about pan-Asianism at the same time. So yes, that is literature does, I mean, at some point of time, it definitely talks about sentience, or it is prone to think about prone towards sentience. But I won't be saying that all that, I mean, we cannot really think about it all the time for all the literary text or pieces. I mean, um, so maybe you can maybe specify which period you are talking about, or which author you are talking about. Yeah.
I think they haven't specified any timeline in that. It's a general
Okay. Yeah.
idea they
No,
would
I
want
personally
to.
don't think so that it is like that. So, but if you are taking a particular author, a time, a tradition, then maybe it is easy to understand what you are talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. I think Mr. Rindon would take over now. Are you there, sir?
Yeah. Hello, ma'am. Barnali, what are your views on Damroche's opinion on gains in translation, or that a work transforms when it crosses the border?
Um, so you are asking me this question because okay, fine. So my take on this is like, obviously you can. I mean, I can speak from my own experience as attending Damroche's class probably, and that is, I can just say that probably, the way he thinks about translation as a part, or translation a method, in which world literature should be read, and how he's thinking about elliptical translation, and the translation gains, the text gains in translation. I have lots to say about it. Probably I think there can be a different viewpoint. I mean, since probably his positioning is very different, he is uh, talking from one particular place, which is mostly looking at the um, I would say Eurocentric vision. Maybe again, it's a overused term now, but from a multilingual country like where I belong to, from there, as I see outside the window, as if Shidadi would be saying, it's a very different thing, right? I mean, and when we are talking about, let's say, Chinese text, a Chinese text, when it is we are reading in translation, how it is not really gaining but sometimes also losing. that is also, I don't have a problem with reading the translation, but I think I would be very critical about what the translation holds. What is the process of reading the text? It is absolutely fine to read a text in translation, but also we should, in the in the classroom, at least we should be discussing that the translation has this kind of problems, that we are losing it here, and in that way it's not easy to do. It's like you need to have the original text probably, and you need to criticize it, that see, this is where we have lost it. So yeah, I am not, I think that recently what he has been writing is probably better than what I discussed here. So maybe he is also changing his viewpoints, and he has changed his viewpoints on world
Thank
literature.
you, Barnali. The next, and this is the last of today. Shashwat Panda from North Odisha University asked that what would be your response to Amir Mufti's contention that world literature cannot be separated from the pervasive presence of English or the history of its institutional politics?
Yes, I agree, totally agree. Yes, I totally agree. It cannot be, because it's a part of that. This is how world literature has been born. So I usually in my classroom I talk about how world literature is also, it's becoming sustainable through this print media. Every year a new anthology is coming up, and that's a huge market, right? I mean, that Martin Buckner's books or David Ambush's literature anthology has huge markets. So depends on the market also. So this is very much supported by the institution, and it cannot be separated. Yes, I agree.
Thank you, Dr. Barnali, for such a brilliant and informative interaction. We'll now end this session. And before ending, I want to thank my dear colleague, Dr. Sharda Acharya, and all my colleagues in the department, my students, and all the participants who showed their interest. And I'm very grateful to all these virtual attendees. And see you all next day. And the
Thank you
next
very much.
day is on 7th, 4:45 p.m. Dr. Minmoy Pramanik will address us. I'll share all the news by tonight or tomorrow morning. Thank you. Thank you, Bornalidhi, once again. And thank
Thank
you,
you so
Sharda
much.
ma'am.
Thank you for all the questions. Thank you so much, Rindan, for inviting me for this talk.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much, Dr. Shantara Acharya, for introducing me.
Thank you,
Thank you.
ma'am. Thank you for this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you.